Clinton, I go into in the first few chapters of the book who he really was. And they're the official, marketed version of these candidates. And it fools a lot of people on the left. Like in the Clinton book, I quote from Jan Wenner, who was the founder of Rolling Stone magazine, which is like an icon of the counterculture of the 60s. And in '92 election, he had an editorial, and he was saying, "Oh, vote for Bill Clinton. Finally, we have somebody of our generation. Vote for him." And yet, that was the illusion Clinton cultivated, that he had been an anti-war activist in the 60s, he was this hippie into the sexual revolution. But really, what's that?
That's for sure.
Yeah. But firstly, Clinton had a very bad character. And I quote, Al Gore's mother, when I was around politics her whole life, and not that Al Gore is a great person either, but when Al Gore introduced his mother, because Al Gore's father was a senator, and she'd been around Washington her whole life, and she said, I'm a good judge, because Al brought Bill to meet his whole family at one point, and Al Gore's mother took Al aside and said, "This is a bad guy, don't associate with him." And she said, I've been around Washington my whole life. And this is a bad guy, whatever the image. Firstly, he's a sexual predator. There's evidence that he's a serial rapist, and then he would bite the lips of women to weaken them when he raped them. But setting that aside, he's a power-hungry guy from the beginning. He was also, he was groomed by Winthrop Rockefeller. Winthrop Rockefeller was the governor of Arkansas in the mid-1960s from the Rockefeller dynasty. And his best friend in World War II, he served in World War II, was related to Bill Clinton's mother. And so Winthrop Rockefeller was among those to groom. Now Clinton, he was a bad guy, but he had talent. I don't think Obama maybe has some talent, although I've heard Obama speak, and I don't think he's actually a very good speaker in person. Clinton, I think, has talent. He can give a very good speech. They said from the beginning that he could go to a town fair in Arkansas in the rural areas, and he could win the people over. He's a good talker. He's very personable. He's a great fundraiser. He had real political talent. They recognized that. And so they groomed him, Rockefeller. And then the CIA, he went to Oxford, he went to Georgetown, and then he may have been recruited at Georgetown because he studied under Carroll Quigley, who wrote these books on the Anglo-American elite. And basically he was supporting, although his books are actually provide a window into some of the dark side of the Anglo-American elite. He doesn't sugarcoat everything, but he kind of in the end justified their rule over humanity. And that was one of Clinton's professors, and Clinton did well in the class, and he was smart. So he may have been groomed by this guy, Carroll Quigley. Then he got a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford. He was a roommate of Strobe Talbot, Strobe Talbot came from a Yale Skull and Bones background, and his uncle was the Secretary of the Air Force who did favors for the CIA. And then Talbot became the Russian editor of Time magazine, which, Time, we know the connection with CIA and the establishment. Then he became the Clinton's point man on Russia and the State Department, and he's the godfather of Russiagate, Strobe Talbot. So this is Clinton's roommate, and the two of them were sent on a mission when Clinton was at Oxford into Russia and the Soviet Union to smuggle the memoirs of Nikita Khrushchev, because that was useful for the U.S. and the CIA in the Cold War, because Khrushchev gave a famous speech denouncing Stalin and made the Soviet Union look terrible. So this is a propaganda coup for the United States and CIA. So that was their mission, to smuggle it out, and they got it. And Talbot ultimately translated for Time magazine. And Kuzmarov Jr. admitted he got drunk once, a top CIA operative, and he admitted that, Clinton worked for us, and he was part of the 3 bad letters, is how Meyer said. So it's been admitted that Clinton was recruited in the CIA. He has ties with Winthrop Rockefeller. They groom him. He comes back to Arkansas, and now he wasn't he was a smart guy, but by the time at Oxford, he was a party animal. And actually, he never graduated because he was accused of sexual assault of a woman at Oxford. And the State Department did an investigation, and they said he was there to party and womanize, not to study. So anyway, he comes back. Somehow he gets, he got into Yale somehow, and he didn't study very much at Yale either. I think Hillary helped him pass his classes. He barely even attended his classes. And then he come back to Arkansas. He ran for Congress. He got seed money from his uncle Raymond Clinton, who was in the Dixie Mafia. So his family has a connection with the Dixie Mafia. He runs for Congress. He almost wins. He has the political talent. He challenges a Republican. He packages himself as kind of a liberal, counterculture. Although he voiced pretty conservative themes from his first campaign, like he supported Arkansas status as a right-to-work state. So he was not progressive as far as organized labor and labor issues. Then he became the youngest governor in Arkansas history, and that's when he became the governor. The early chapters I go into, he turned Arkansas into a playground of the CIA, and Arkansas was a key state in the Iran-Contra affair. A lot of people don't know this very well, how important Arkansas was to the Iran-Contra affair, because they carried out key arms and drug smuggling operations from Mena, Arkansas, in the western part of Arkansas, and they laundered a lot of the money in local Arkansas banks. And then Clinton set up an agency called he was governor, Arkansas Development Finance Authority, and it was really a front. They gave loans to all these arms companies. He actually turned, he packages, he's promoting economic development for Arkansas, but the company that got money and loans for its development were his personal cronies who were donating to his campaign and military industry, because they were producing arms to send to the Contras. And the CIA also, I found evidence, because there was an Arkansas committee, it was a group of graduate students at the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville. In the 80s, they were on to Clinton, and they were investigating him, and they carried a decade-long investigation, and they deposited their papers at the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville, so researchers can view their papers and the nature of their investigation, and they had they uncovered quite a lot about corruption going on. And two things I'll mention for the sake of time. One is that they uncovered that the CIA was shaking down local gun dealers in Fayetteville and around Arkansas. They would, they basically stole their guns and drove their businesses into bankruptcy. And this shows the predatory nature of the CIA, that they would do this. Most of us wouldn't necessarily think of gun dealers as the greatest people in the world, but they are legitimate businessmen. And the CIA shook them down and drove them into bankruptcy and often threatened their lives because they were stealing guns to give to the Contras that were being flown out of Mena. And the other thing I'll mention is Clinton's ties with, was uncovered in this investigation, with Jackson Stevens, who is, Stevens, if you go to Little Rock, because I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, so I spent a lot of time in Arkansas, and I did a lot of research on Clinton, and I was able to interview a lot of people. Some were whistleblowers. In any event, if you go to Little Rock, Arkansas, you'll find, when you're driving to the city, Stevens, the biggest building is Stevens, you see it. It's the largest investment firm outside of Wall Street. It's owned by Jackson, well, they're passed on now, but Jackson Witt Stevens. They were big donors to Clinton. They also own Systematics, which is a data processing company that's tied to the CIA, and they were involved with the Promise software theft, as well as with the BCCI Bank, which was a CIA money laundering bank. So they were financed through the Arkansas Development Finance. They were getting loans through that, and they owned a lot of the Arkansas banks that were laundering the money from the armed and drug smuggling operations that were criminal operations to arm the counter-revolutionary Contras in Nicaragua. And you can guess who their lawyer was. Hillary Clinton at the Rose Law Firm represented the Stevens, and the Stevens helped Clinton gain the presidency in '92. They gave him the big money he needed, and they bailed him out. He was going to have to end his campaign at some point in the primary, and he went to Stevens with a sugar daddy. So you can read more about this in the book. And that sets the groundwork for the Clinton presidency, where he basically, what I discuss in the book is that amazingly, you have Robert McNamara, who's actually the good guy in this story, because Robert McNamara in '91 testified before Congress that, he says, all right, the Cold War's over, we won. Now we can have a new peace dividend. We can finally invest in education, healthcare. We have no more enemy. So let's have this peace dividend. And we know who doesn't want that, the military-industrial complex, CIA, and their guy, Clinton, comes in and invents new excuses for wars and for sustaining, for abandoning what McNamara wanted, and many others in the establishment wanted that. But Clinton invented a new pretext of humanitarian intervention, and he hoodwinked the liberals to store their protest signs in the attic and not protest the war in Bosnia. You guys can discuss other sort of foreign policy intervention that I also cover in the book. But I think that was Clinton's significance, that he created this liberal veneer for revitalizing the U.S. empire at the end of the Cold War, and for also revitalizing the CIA. And the CIA played a key role, like in the dirty wars that I go into in the book, like in the Balkans. That was the classic humanitarian intervention where Milosevic and the Serb were presented as genocidists and the next Hitler, and that justified the U.S. bombing when, obviously a cartoonish view the situation there. The Serbs had tried to keep the Yugoslav Federation together. Milosevic had been the last, one of the last socialist leaders in Europe that the U.S. and CIA wanted to remove. Their strategy was to Balkanize Yugoslavia, divide and conquer basically, and go in there and install client governments and establish U.S. military bases like Camp Bondsteel, which was an outcome of the conflict and the Kosovo War, and basically transformed into a neo-colony of the United States. But Clinton, had the rhetoric and these flowery speeches that made it seem like there was this great moral undertaking to stop genocide, and he got a lot of liberals on board, and even people like Paul Wellstone supported it. I believe Bernie Sanders supported it, so even leading liberals in Congress supported it. And then there was no protest. The anti-war movement had dissolved at the end of the Vietnam War and never came back. And a lot of the liberals were supporting Clinton. And then the book goes forward into many other interventions, and it sets the groundwork for today because in various key ways. One being the rhetoric of humanitarian intervention, and it sets the groundwork for the responsibility to protect measure that had been used to justify U.S. imperialistic wars like in Libya or interventions in Syria. It's the same kind of rhetoric we see today. The other aspect is, I have two chapters on Clinton's policy toward Russia and his support for NATO expansion, which we can see easily today what led to the catastrophe in Ukraine. I have some discussion of Clinton's Ukraine policy, and Clinton was heavily invested in this project of trying to pry Ukraine away in the post-Soviet era into the Western orbit. I discussed his disastrous policy toward Russia, where he ruined their economy, supporting Boris Yeltsin, who was the most corrupt leader in Russian history, and pushing the neoliberal shock therapy privatization policies that had disastrous consequences. So I go into a lot of depth in that in the Russia chapter. And then he also pushed a hard line toward China. He really unequivocally abandoned Nixon. Here Nixon was, had a better approach to China as far as promoting more cooperative policy. Clinton really moved decisively away from that, and he started this policy of arming Taiwan very heavily and nearly provoked a crisis that almost led to a war in his time. And now we're in a very perilous situation with regards to, and that's something I go into in the Obama book. And here the left was totally asleep. There should have been huge protests and attention when Obama's pivot to Asia was a horrific and disastrous policy that's leading us on the course toward World War III. Also as far as just the diversion of government resources to needless militarism, military spending, and provoking regional arms race. But Clinton kind of laid the groundwork for Obama's disastrous pivot by adopting a hardline approach toward China and arming Taiwan. So these are among the policies, because the subtitle of the book is How Clinton's Malign Foreign Policy Launched the U.S. Trajectory from Bush to Biden. And it's a lot of Clinton retreat and then Obama retreats who are carrying out the horrific foreign policies of the Joe Biden administration today. And in the Obama year, there's a lot of Clintonites carrying out the horrific policy like the pivot to Asia policy, or triggering this new Cold War with Russia. And then a predatory intervention in Africa, which Dan will talk about in a sec. I go into in both books. They both had a horrible policy toward Africa. Clinton was supporting massive genocide by Rwanda, and it was arming. And there was a myth of non-intervention in Rwanda. From the beginning, Clinton's administration was intent on consolidating the power of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, led by Paul Kagame, with a proxy of the United States, and then armed them as they invaded Congo, to plunder the Congo. And the government that installed gave choice contracts to American corporations, including American Mineral Fields, which was headquartered in Hope, Arkansas, Clinton's hometown. And it was owned by a guy, Jean-Raymond Boule, had been a big-time Clinton donor, was a big profiteer from that policy. And Hillary was even wearing his diamonds, this guy Boule, at the inaugural. So they're pretty shameless about what they do, and they're evil. And people in Arkansas knew it. And it's easy to mock. They're often mocked in liberal circles as kind of hicks. But since I've lived in that region for a long time now, you get to know the people, and they actually have a political savvy about them in a lot of cases. And they know. I mean, there's a reason they hate the Clintons. And they know how corrupt and totally unethical they are. So you can read the book for more